Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying with us and for having such a good discussion in panel 1. We are continuing in the second panel. This panel will be also followed by a brief discussion on Slido. So if you will to ask the question, use our Slido and we will approach them by the end of discussion. In this panel, we will take a look on the methodology, on the framework that we are preparing in our project with German Marshall Fund. We will look also at the investigative practices, how to put this topic in the practice. And we will look also on the recommendations and operationalization of the issue and how can we defend our societies against strategic corruption. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our distinguished speakers. I will take the pleasure and read some of your bios and introduce you. First of all, the first speaker is Veronika Zahorjan. She's currently working at the Nest Institute as an analyst. Previously, she spent many years at the Ministry of Interior of the Slovak Republic, where she founded and served as a Director General of Institute for Governance and Security Analysis. And she also held many positions at the Office of the Government Plenipotentiary for the Development of Civil Society. Next, we have Karolína Kiripolská. She studied journalism at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. She works for many years at the Investigative Center of Jan Kuciak. And since September 25, she is working for the Denník newspaper. And she's focusing on various issues such as disinformation, foreign influence, and hate speech. And we have also Michal Piško, who has worked at the daily newspaper SME, where he spent 11 years. And since 2015, he is working with Transparency International. And he currently serves as a director of Transparency International Slovakia since 2021. And last but not least, our distinguished guest online, Dr. Joseph Pozsgai-Alvarez is a specially appointed associate professor at the School of Human Sciences in Osaka University in Japan. And he is the founder of the Japan Anti-Corruption Network and member of a steering committee of anti-corruption and integrity of the European Consortium for Political Research. Dr. Alvarez spent over the past 15 years his academic and professional work focusing on knowledge and improving anti-corruption policies and integrity across many countries. So hello to Japan and good evening. I hope, Dr. Pozsgai, we can hear each other.
Yes, hello.
Okay. So thank you very much. So our second panel will go a little bit into practice. We will try to dig deeper on what can we actually do. Like not looking in the first panel, we looked at the various common patterns, but here we will be discussing what can we actually do. And this panel will be, our colleague Veronika will be explaining how the concept can be, or our framework that we are preparing can be put into practice. And we will be discussing how to operationalize these findings that we have. And in this panel, the discussion will be that we don't need basically new term just for sake of the new term, but we need to find out how to put the term of strategic corruption into practical policies and into implementable activities that we can do to make the societies more resilient. So in this way, we will be looking at the framework that we are preparing. Karolína will be speaking about investigative journalism and the point of view of strategic corruption. And then Mr. Piško will be looking at the issue from the point of policy and what can we actually do at the policy level, how to defend ourselves. And Dr. Alvarez, at the end, we will ask you to do some conclusion on what can be the next steps and how to synthesize the academia work with the practical public policy. So first of all, I would like to give word to my colleague Veronika, and she will give you a brief introduction on the framework we are preparing and give you some example of what we are basically doing in our project.
Thank you, Domician. I'm happy to see you here. I prepared just a few simple points. Maybe some of them will be repeating what we already heard, maybe from different angle. But I'm here to do some kind of a teaser and make you want to read the framework and ideally use it in practice. So I will speak about what this framework is trying to do, why we think it may be useful, where are the added value actually, at least we think where the added value could be. So as Domician said, we developed this framework because we felt like the theory is not enough. And if we want it to be impactful, the concept to be impactful in real life, we need to give to practitioners some practical tool that will help them understand difficult cases or orient in difficult cases, identify patterns, to make journalists know what to verify, to provide them with some kind of steps, ideal steps or workflow, help them to structure leads, and what is also very important, to help institutions notice the risks, and so identify them as early as possible so they can do some measures. That is why we created a framework in a way that you can go through case studies, for example. You can use typologies of actors. You can work with indicators, red flags, and at the end we already tried to draft some recommendation also for public administration. The second point is about strategic corruption and how it differs from traditional or ordinary corruption. Nedim already, within his speech, already said something about the differences between adjacent concepts, and I would like to say that in traditional anti-corruption work, we often look for one unlawful act. It is usually a bribe. It could be manipulated procurement. It could be conflict of interest. Usually there is exchange of money or gifts or bitcoins these days, as maybe Michal will talk about something more modern, for a favor. And those are kind of single acts. But strategic corruption is a little bit different. And between the main characteristics, we can include that it may involve legal or like completely legal or semi-legal steps. It may involve intermediaries from even other countries, from shell companies. It could be state-owned enterprises, etc. And it may unfold slowly over time. So the broader effects we can sometimes only see after months, years. So the question is not only can we prove a single crime or single evidence, but if we see a pattern. And for seeing the pattern and defining strategic corruption, in this framework we are using three conditions, or we can call it three definitional elements. And those are inducement, if we see an inducement there, if there is a visible abusement of entrusted powers, and if we see already mentioned broader strategic effect, so beyond a private gain. And this effect may take various form. It could be political or geopolitical, it could be economic, it could take form of deepening dependency or a strong leverage. It could also take form of an insecurity issue or weakening resilience of the country, of the society, etc., or weakening democracy. Another point is that the framework is analytical and practical tool. It's not a final verdict. And this is very important because the framework is not a substitute for criminal law. It's not meant to prove a guilt. It's not meant to label people without evidence. Its role is more modest. It is more about orientation and connecting signals that are often looked at separately. For example, ownership changes, network ties, maybe strange procurement outcomes, narrative shifts, and deepening dependencies in strategic sectors. Each of these signals, when they stand alone, may look a bit weak, but when several of them, I'm not saying like all of them, but at least several of them point at the same direction, we are already starting to see a more coherent picture and strong analytic picture. So the framework is really a tool for orientation, not for accusation, and that is very important. The key added value, if we should name only one added value, it should be the convergence logic. And also in the framework we are using more layers of analysis. We are calling it like a toolbox. And we are using network analysis, we are using ownership analysis, legislative tracing, narrative analysis, and dependency analysis. And all of those analyses are asking different questions. For example, who is shaping the rules? That was already mentioned. Who benefits? Who is connected to whom? Where the dependency is deepening and where the leverage is occurring. Together, these tools help us move from isolated observations to a more coherent picture. Another point is about ambient. Nedim already mentioned ambient and indicators or enabling indicators that are kind of preparing the environment for strategic corruption to operate. And our attempt is therefore not to catch only direct indicators of strategic corruption, but also about these indicators of environment and make the prevention actually more possible even before the strategic corruption happens. So these do not prove strategic corruption by themselves, but they may create a permissive environment where it becomes easier to operate, harder to detect, or more likely to be accepted. These include, for example, soft power projects in areas like culture, sports, or academia. It could be opaque media ownerships, politically conditioned investments, external finance, lawfare, like SLAPS accusations, or, for example, foreign agents laws. It could be narratives that normalize dependencies or the legitimize criticism of watchdogs, or journalists, or other professionals. In other words, these signs may not show the corruption itself, as I said, but they may show the environment in which corruption-based influence can work more effectively. So the framework tries to capture both the direct mechanisms and the enabling environment around it. Another point is about institutions, public institutions especially, and that is that they don't have to wait until having an evidence or the direct proof. There is a lot of space between doing nothing and waiting for accusation. They can do conflict of interest reviews. They can do internal audits. They can do risk assessments, enhanced due diligence. Thank you. Beneficial ownership checks, procurement reviews, and they can actually coordinate between each other much better. We can also make better coordination with different countries, which was already mentioned. So together we can call it vulnerability assessment. So the framework is meant to support early as possible action and more proportionate action. And we should distinguish between threshold for punishment and the threshold for precaution. This is especially important in areas linked to resilience, strategic sector, or national exposure. The question is, where do we go from here? We don't want to say that this framework is final. We are not saying we are like absolute experts on strategic corruption. I mean, it is evolving. We think that the next stage is basically testing the framework and understand where the framework is still abstract, where it's maybe too narrow or too wide, or actually we are very interested in feedback from analysts, from investigators, from practitioners, and also from public administration if it is trying to use it. So the next stage is testing, and after that we will be able to make even more precise recommendation for public policy. And also, what is important, this framework is right now, let's call it like a backbone, common backbone, and a common language also for different target groups. And that is already very important because we didn't have that common language yet. At least not in Slovakia, even if there is an interesting academic debate going on. So to conclude, we are not offering a final answer, we are offering a practical starting point, a way to move from concept to practice, a way to connect signals into a stronger picture, and way to help different actors respond earlier, more carefully, and more intelligently. And if the framework helps people ask better questions, identify stronger patterns, and avoid both underreaction and overreaction, actually, then it has already done something useful. Thank you for now.
Okay, thank you, Veronika, for introduction of the framework. And now we'll move to Karolína. You are investigative journalist. We had many discussions about the topic, and could you please elaborate on how you see it from the perspective of practitioner, and what does it mean to think in the terms of strategic corruption in your work?
Oh, of course. Like when you said strategic corruption, I see it as something that I should think of, not something I should write about, because it's a tool how me as a journalist, my job is to understand, to observe, and to explain it to other people. That's my job. I don't need to use the word this is strategic corruption. I'm not an investigator. like in police. I'm not in justice. I'm not doing any like research. I should explain it easily to people. But to do it, I need to understand what I'm writing about. And when I saw your methodology, because I saw it before, I was thinking of articles I wrote before, like last year or this year. And then I realized that I was writing about 12 members of parliament going to China in the end of 2025. And we saw many pictures from that business trip, how they went to negotiations, how they meet mayors, how they meet other officials in China. They tried to communicate it as a success of Slovak Republic visiting inspirational industries. They call China, like, as if I remember, the new U.S. So someone who should inspire us in the case of economy. They illustrate it as a powerhouse. And then I was there sitting and watching Facebook videos and so. And my question was, who paid for that? Because I didn't see that. I saw it on the website of the parliament that it's an official business trip of our members of parliament. But when I asked the office, they said that they didn't pay for that. And then we found that it was paid by China. And China was the country which created program for these people. So they went to negotiate something profitable for Slovakia with people China wanted to talk to. They saw things China wanted to see them. And that was an interesting fact. So I went to the parliament, I talked to these members of parliament, and I asked them, is it okay for you if China paid for this? And you came back and you talk just positive things, what you saw. You are not critical about it. For example, they visited minority of Miao. I'm not a Chinese speaker, so maybe it's differently written and differently But we know about Uyghur, and they came back and they said, "Oh, China treats minorities quite well," and that was something when I realized that this was, we can say, strategically influential and profitable for China. Is it strategic corruption? I'm not the one to say. Is it part of the influence? Yes. Like, we don't have that many people in parliament, and 12 of them, it's quite a big number. And also Eduard Chmelar. So this was part of something bigger. Maybe there was a proxy indicator. Maybe we see that China wants to have a picture of powerhouse of world, and when our members of parliament come back and talk about it as a powerhouse of the world, it's interesting. So this was quite clear. But then I was thinking, okay, this is easy. What I was writing about else, and then I realized I was writing about cult Alatra. It's a group of thousand people spreading disinformation on social media. And I saw several videos about disinformation about power plants. And my question was, who doesn't want us to have power plants? Who wants us to be dependent on oil? And then when I saw the Alatra group or Creative Society, then I realized that they have own God, which is basically Putin, and they have creators from Ukraine/Russia, and then they are quite intransparent. So we don't know what's the source of their money. And this was the moment I realized, okay, maybe this is also a tool of someone else, someone who is powerful, someone who has money. But me, as a journalist, I'm not the one to say. I will show you the case. I will think of it. I will show you everything I discovered. But I'm not the one who will say this is a proxy indicator of strategic corruption. There are more people in different positions to say. So to fully answer your question, what are important things for journalists to understand about strategic corruption, and what are the limits? The limits are, we cannot connect the dots. As from my perspective, we will describe separately every indicator, and maybe people who write, I'm from hard news, maybe opinion people who write opinion pieces, or people from different positions, they will connect it. But I'm the one who should be aware it's connected, but I will probably write about it separately. What is useful about the methodology we heard about just right now from Veronika, sometimes it's so important to see how it works on paper to realize what should we be aware of. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for this insight, and we'll come back to it in the discussion. Next, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Piško, and I need to start your presentation in the back, so sorry for this technical break for 30 seconds.
But I can start to speak. Yeah, I prepared also maybe 4 slides to show you something about our perspective. So my name is Michal Piško, I'm the Director of Transparency International Slovakia, and we have been active in Slovakia since 1998, so it is almost 28 years in the field of anti-corruption and promoting transparency and public engagement. I don't know if... okay, so probably it's off. No, it doesn't work. Now? Can you try to? Yeah. So, I was asked in 2019 to write a chapter for Globsec about strategic corruption, and at that time it was completely new term for me, and I didn't know much about that, so I tried to dive as deep as possible to the topic, but there were only indications about the strategic corruption in Slovakia. It was very difficult to find some evidence or some cases. And it is still the case. What is the even maybe more complicated is that at the time there was at least some attempt or some willingness of the state to deal with this topic or with the topic of corruption. Right now we are facing to a very different situation. 2018 it was turning point in some respect after the murders of Jan Kuciak and Martina Kušnírova, and significant state capture was investigated and disclosed, but it created also some sort of anti-reaction, and after the election in 2023 the new government decided to change their approach in anti-corruption as well, also in cooperation with NGOs. So, for example, as you can see on this picture, there are 3 different prime ministers meeting with 3 different directors of Transparency International. It was very common that we cooperated with public authorities, including prime ministers, and we were involved in some working groups and selection committees and so on to prepare the policies, or at least to do some advocacy for better tool. Right now, as you can see, the bottom picture is current one. It is from the social network of Prime Minister Robert Fico and his 4th government. So he labeled us as foreign agent, and it is a whole approach of this government, unfortunately. And it is very important environment or context for this problem, because if there is no willingness to deal with this problem, if there are no capacities, also if the authorities are dissolved, like National Crime Agency or Special Prosecutor Office, or some analytical units on ministries, hybrid threats units, and other capacities of the state are completely destroyed or very, very weak. It is very difficult to deal with the topic of corruption from the broader perspective, not only from this narrower perspective related with strategic corruption. What we try to do, there are some pictures of our portals. We are in our DNA is to create or to provide some open data to the public, because it is one of the most significant or meaningful way how to deal with corruption as such. So we try to provide the data about monitoring election campaigns, transparency of municipalities, beneficial ownership of specific companies in specific industries, public companies, information about state-owned companies, and so on. And or Eurofunds, for example, we have the new portal about spending of Eurofunds. So we try to provide all this data to the public, and not to be only aid of us in transparency, but also to create some network of people who are able to analyze public data and try to find and disclose some better patterns. So, of course, the situation which I just mentioned is also quite visible from the global context in the famous or the most well-known Corruption Perception Index provided by Transparency International Secretariat in Berlin. Slovakia dropped quite significantly in the last 2 years. It was more than it fell down by 14 positions only in 2 years under the current government. It was the most significant drop, or one of the most significant drop in the world globally. So again, in this environment, it is very difficult to speak about some improvement in field of fight against corruption, but at the same time, not to be only negative, we also can see some check and balances. Some mechanisms are still working, because, as you probably know, there were a few of very dangerous pieces of legislation also in terms of anti-corruption, like attempt to abolish Whistleblower Protection Office or adopt Russian-style NGO legislation, and thankfully Constitutional Court struck down these pieces of legislation recently. And my last slide is about some policies which are maybe a little bit general, because they are important also for fighting with corruption, also from general point of view. But I would say that they are very important also for the topic of strategic corruption. So of course we have to follow the influence channels. So I prepared also some very basic traffic lights framework. So as you can see, we still have some important or meaningful anti-corruption tools tackling these problems. For example, beneficial ownership transparency register in Slovakia is one of the best worldwide still, because it is not based only anti-money laundering directive of European Union, but it is also based on public sector partners. So each company or each subject which has the biggest contract with the state, that 100,000 euros should be registered in this register, and it is also verified. So we have very relevant and reliable data about the owners of the significant companies in Slovakia. We have also open contracting system, which is still not so common across the world. So each institution has to publish their contracts, and we can follow the money and influences in contracting. There is a new regulation ahead of us related with lobbying regulation. Of course, there is a red spot still. However, it is in preparation phase, because we still haven't seen the final proposal, and it could be quite dangerous, because it is, as we can see, this attempt last year with anti-NGO regulation or law, it was also based on this recommendation. which is promoted by international organizations like OECD, European Commission, or Greco, that we should have some sort of lobbying register or regulation. But finally, they used this recommendation, that the government used this recommendation and completely reversed it and used it for, burden for NGOs. And exclusively did lobbyists only from NGOs. And as I mentioned before, thankfully the Constitutional Court struck it down as unconstitutional. So we have also to protect decision-making in strategic areas, and as you can see from this traffic light framework, it is not very developed here in Slovakia. However, we have some sort of conflict of interest regulation or asset declaration. They are not very functional. They are very formalistic and very easy to bypass or avoid. So, and there is no political will to change it. Unfortunately, we tried to do that for decades, I would say, and there is no will. During the previous government, there was some working groups. We were a part of that to change the asset declaration system, but unfortunately, it had not been finished. And of course, that again, respond. So there are also some very important tools like whistleblower protection. And again, I mentioned it, there were some Constitutional Court decision. One of them was also related with Whistleblower Protection Office, because last December there was an attempt to abolish the current Whistleblower Protection Office. Thankfully, again, it was stopped, but it is still under the attacks, and it is the whole system is undermined somehow. So we will see what will be the future development. Support investigative journalism. Again, there is a very different approach of the current government, unfortunately, because investigative journalists and NGOs, watchdogs, are more perceived as enemies of the state or something like that. However, investigative journalists should be a very important part of functional system tackling strategic corruption. Thankfully, we still have quite high quality investigative journalists here in Slovakia. So from this perspective, there is no threat point, but still, I would say that we have very strong space for development. And of course, Veronika mentioned that it's very important to build institutional coordination and capacities. And right now, as I mentioned before, we are in a very low level of that. So it is also a very strong task ahead of us. So very briefly, the description of my perspective, and I would love to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Piško. Okay, so thank you very much for your explanation of your activities and of the strategic corruption traffic lights. Now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Pozsgai, and just to make a disclosure, Dr. Pozsgai-Alvarez, Joseph, and also Dr. Hogic and also Mr. Piško, they made quite a big contribution in steering our framework. So we are not preparing it on our own, but we are trying to include as many professionals as possible to give it practical applicability. So Joseph, I would love to give you space maybe to give us some kind of bridge between academia, between your experience and between the framework that we are creating.
Yes, thank you. And I hope one can hear me all right. Yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't be there physically with you all. Everyone, if anybody can give me the thumbs up to know everybody can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. It's good to move a little bit as well. It's a tall task to be invited to say a few words at the very end of such an interesting meeting. Because of the keynote speech and the first panel and the other members of this panel have already covered so many key elements and issues related to the concept of strategic corruption. So inevitably, I would overlap, or my comments would overlap with some of them. I hope I don't catch everyone already kind of looking forward to the coffee after the event. So I'll try to be brief because I would love to hear your questions about the discussion. But as it was mentioned, so a framework has been under development, a framework that it's meant to play a very important role in how we move forward with this concept of strategic corruption, because it is not born from just academic imagination. Certainly not. It was a term that was employed in recognition of a phenomenon that was becoming increasingly pervasive in our current global security issue, right? As everybody can recognize, over the last 10 years, dramatic changes have taken place in the international system, yes? The form of corruption that we are discussing today is not something essentially new, as Nedim mentioned at the very beginning of the event. What is new, however, is the recognition that we need to be able, or we need the tools to separate it and observe it and investigate it and address it in a way that is separate to how we've been handling corruption in the past. Yes? Because of course corruption is also an area of academic concern, but it's certainly an area of social and universal concern, right? Corruption is something that pretty much everyone around the world is legitimately concerned about, and all countries are investing heavily on addressing. Now, strategic corruption is as a term and as an idea, is new in that historically we have been concentrated, or at least over the last 50 years, on discrete events that we recognize as corrupt, yes? So we recognize an act that has been criminalized in our legal systems, an individual who is, or a group of individuals who are responsible for that event, and so we investigate, we collect evidence, we prosecute them, and we try to control corruption in this way, yes? Strategic corruption, as again, it has been mentioned or suggested earlier, is a little bit of a different beast in that corruption is essential to it, but it's not just corruption, right? Corruption has an instrumental role in this longer goal of a country getting a stronger geopolitical position by eroding the position of other peers, of other countries, yes? So in this case, strategic corruption is different in that it's not about the behavior of one specific act or group of acts, but rather when you look at them as a group, what are the goals that you can start identifying? And this is something that Karolína kind of was pointing out during her participation, right? She mentioned about how strategic corruption is something rather to think about, and not a specific term that you want to use. It's obviously not a specific legal offense, yes? So the point, at least right now, is not, oh, somebody is being prosecuted for strategic corruption. That would be antithetical to the project of addressing strategic corruption. But rather is, when you have this situation where a number of events and actors and networks are connected by long-term consequences in terms of erosion of institutions, reduced security, shifting geopolitical circumstances, you need to address it, but you cannot address it with traditional tools. Yes? And so this is where strategic corruption comes in. Academicians are working on it, but again, it's not an academic exercise. It's really a very real concern. So the good news, however, is that, and this is something that is becoming very relevant in the way that framework is being designed, is that strategic corruption is complex, potentially is even more complex than just traditional corruption, but in its complexity, we can also recognize opportunities. And some of them, of course, that the aim is for the framework to help identify those elements, but I can already start suggesting some for those groups and organizations and individuals who will be employing the framework moving forward, right? Because as strategic corruption is complex, it has different stages, it's conducted across different jurisdictions, different arenas. over a long period of time, that complexity also allows for multiple points of vulnerability. Vulnerability for the target country, which of course needs to be addressed, but also vulnerabilities or points, elements that allow for decision makers and law enforcement agencies and investigators, both in the private sector and the public sector, to kind of cut some links in that change that produce strategic corruption. Yes, and so just to give you a few ideas of where those elements or vulnerabilities in strategic corruption can be identified. We have the offending country's capacity to mobilize resources, for example, because even though strategic corruption does not always have just financial resources as a center, it obviously employs financial resources at different points of the effort over a long period of time. And so if we can start via sanctions or other mechanisms, start addressing the capacity of an offending state to mobilize resources to corrupt individuals and organizations abroad, that is a good target, right? A separate element that can be exploited for the benefits of security is the recognition of the role of intermediate jurisdictions in the transfer and hiding of those financial resources. Very often the place where enablers are conduct their businesses, yes, and specifically the regulatory environment that we find in these intermediate jurisdictions, yes, because most of the time, because of the complexity, is not just country A. For example, again, as it was mentioned earlier, the Russian states kind of mobilizing resources to influence decision makers in Europe and other parts of the world. This type of behavior is not conducted directly, but often through intermediaries, right? Either in friendly or just countries external to that region. So those arenas also provide opportunities for actors, academicians, again, investigators, and law enforcement agencies to try to do something about it. The role of enablers, something that the UK is really moving to clamp on, right? To address the responsibility of enablers in different industries in facilitating some stages of strategic corruption. The environment was also pointed out earlier by multiple participants in this meeting, which is basically the domestic institutional integrity and how we can make our institutions more resilient. And finally, how we can make our entire systems more resilient, so that even though some elements of our systems are being eroded or attacked or targeted by offending countries, as a system, we can remain secure. Yes? And so again, that we need to think of that the complexity of strategic corruption, sure, makes it harder to study and certainly makes it harder for us to develop legislation to specifically attack this in a traditional legal perspective, but it also opens up opportunities for different actors to do something about it. Finally, I would just like to wrap up well, I think I already went over time. There's some challenges that remain in the development of this idea of strategic corruption. Yes, Nedim also addressed a couple of them earlier on. The most obvious one is that securitization of corruption has some dangers. There are risks associated to it, right? The challenge remains that we need to separate strategic corruption, so how we traditionally recognize and construct the idea of corruption for prevention, control, and deterrence, but we need to do so without creating vulnerabilities for the protection of individual and fundamental rights. Yes? So, of course, we cannot start treating enablers as traitors, right, in the very legal perspective. So we need to be able to protect freedom of speech, yes, and civil society organizations conducting their own activities without fear of everyone being potential targets or enablers of these offending jurisdictions abroad. So how to do that, of course, is part of the equation, and it's a large question for us, all of us, to figure out as we move forward. And I apologize for my long intervention. But those are my words.
Yes, thank you, Joseph, for valuable insight. And I would move forward with discussion, and I have the million-dollar question, basically to all of you. If you had to prioritize one next step for countries like Slovakia, or countries similar like Slovakia, what would it be? What should we do first, and how to start defending ourselves against strategic corruption? And I know you are from different backgrounds, so I would love to hear your ideas on this. Veronika, if you may start.
Mm-hmm. I think the most important thing is to figure out the way how to connect the dots. I mean, in public administration, we know the term the silos or silos effect, and I'm pointing out to coordination of public authorities. And there are various data sets, various signals looked at separately. So I would really appreciate if we find a way how to look at it somehow in that convergence logic and try to see that bigger picture. So the convergence.
Okay, thank you. Karolína?
From my perspective, if I want to know how to connect dots, I need to see what's going on. So for me, it would be really helpful if we would be more transparent country. We are country with good open sources, I must say, because I work on international cross-border projects, and when I see my friends in France, Luxembourg, Austria, they have bigger problems or issues to get to public data but we have them, the main registers. But it always can be better to see connections between companies, oligarchs, decisions, big investments, and people who are in the end of the process.
Yeah, thank you. I would say that we do, or you do, a great job, with tackling this topic and organizing this conference and creating this framework. Also, investigative journalists covered all these cases, or watchdog organizations, and it's great. But in reality, it should be the priority of the state first, on first place. So, and I was critical during my intervention because of weakened capacities of the state to tackling corruption from the broader perspective and from the perspective of strategic corruption as well. So I would say that we have to continue in this effort, definitely, but from the longer term perspective, it should be the priority of the state, and the state should rebuild the country anti-corruption capacities, because without that, I would say that we can disclose some cases, we can, raise awareness of the problem, but we can't tackling the strategic corruption effectively as individual actors, because we need some strategy of the state from the state level.
Thank you, Joseph. What's your point of view on this?
So I would like to build on a couple of things that Michal and Karolína mentioned earlier. Slovakia has a very special position, geopolitically speaking. Yes, part of NATO, EU. At the same time, it's very close to large offending countries in terms of strategic corruption. Russia, over the last number of years, also the influence of Chinese investment has been at the top of the list of areas of concern. The point that I would like to build on what they said is that on the one hand, we need clarity in terms of what are the strategic areas, sectors that we want to protect and make sure that for the long term remain let's say, we can decrease as much as possible their vulnerability to targeting by offending states in terms of corrupting them. That's obviously quite important. At the same time, for a democracy to do this, then we need a general social consensus across party lines in terms of what those strategic areas are and who are the partners that will be working with to remain institutionally resilient. So I also, again, Karolína was mentioning transparency, and indeed the only way that we can foster that type of dialogue is by having that dialogue wide open, involving different members of society and our political elite, and make the decision as a country. Otherwise, because strategic corruption has a long-term perspective, if as a country we start changing position from one administration to another, then it's impossible to really diminish our vulnerability to corrupt attacks.
Thank you, Joseph. We will move. We have still 10 more minutes till the end of the panel, and we have 2 questions on Slido. So we would like to cover this. The first question is what can do employees of public administration, and how can they use the framework that we developed in a practical way when there is lack of political will? That's a question maybe first for Veronika as former government employee. So what's your point on this?
I think those are 2 separate things, like the political will and what can do like public officials. There are already like functioning authorities. Michal mentioned some of them. There is also education on corruption, and of course, like there are some guidelines how to act if you notice something like unclear or something unlawful. You can still use instruments, and they don't depend on political will at all. But I think still we need to recognize patterns, we need to recognize red flags, and then know ideally what are the mechanisms or tools that I can use as a public official. So there is, and that would be interesting, another step to do trainings also for public officials in the stage 2 or 3. So.
And if you see something suspicious, talk about it.
Yeah.
To us.
Michal.
Yeah, I would also, I agree, and I would also mention with the topic of integrity. I would say that it is very important, to raise the topic of ethical integrity also with the public clerks, and I would say that again this topic is not much priority of the current government. So I would say that it is the starting or beginning point for a more resilient public sphere as well.
Joseph, do you want to give your opinion on this?
I was thinking maybe pass. It's such a complex question, a difficult question to begin with. I'll just potentially just then endorse Michal's comments. At the end of the day, if there is no political will, we regardless of that, we still expect public officials to be able to act with integrity and follow their own instinct, yes, based within, of course, within the constitutional framework of the country. But at the end of the day, everyone has agency and everyone is responsible for their own acts, regardless of political will. Ideally, we will have political will to fighting corruption and all forms of corruption, but when there isn't, then it is difficult, I completely understand, but that's what it is.
And maybe we could prioritize employees that work in a strategic sector or working with critical infrastructure. So there are maybe ways how to prioritize.
If I put down my moderator's hat and try to give one sentence of my opinion as a panelist, from my experience working for the government, there were always many people who were on the bottom of the government basically, and they were not making political decisions. And it's still crucial to build some kind of critical mass and educate the government officials on this, even though they are not in decision makers or policy makers. But still, they might be people who need to understand these kind of topics, and they might be able to do something, maybe not on the strategic level, but at least if they know, it's building some kind of public administration resilience of Slovakia or other countries. So, yeah, putting back my moderator hat, I will ask one more question, and we can conclude because we have less than 5 minutes. There is one more question about how can strategic corruption framework help prove the intent behind the strategic corruption, which is often a matter of interpretation. That's maybe for Joseph or for Veronika first. And I don't know, Joseph, if you want to...
Maybe Joseph.
I actually thought that Veronika may want to take one, but I'll just then say a couple of things and maybe Veronika can wrap it up. The framework very explicitly, I think from the beginning, is the point of this is not to prove intent, because that's impossible, yes? In the same way that even political will is incredibly debated, because it's difficult to ascertain if leaders actually want to defeat corruption, yes, or if it's political capital. In terms, even more complex. But rather what the framework is meant to do is to help identify the dots, connect the dots, and realize the likelihood that there is a situation of strategic corruption taking place. Veronika?
I would say very similar thing, but yeah, there is like never a smoking gun, or it is very hard to get to smoking gun evidence. So yeah, we have to like rely on connecting the dots. Yeah.
Okay, and we are coming to the end basically of our allocated time. So I would like to thank to our panelists for your time and good discussion. And also thank Joseph for joining us from Japan in the evening, your evening or night. And I will be happy to conclude the conference. If I may use this time as a closing remark, if you agree, you can stay here, our colleagues. And I wanted, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to thank you very much for being here with us today. These discussions, it gave us, it showed us that this is relevant, the topic is relevant, and we need to elaborate on this in the future. And we need to work on this because, as was mentioned several times, the topic is, it's complicated, it's complex, and neither of us is expert on strategic corruption, as Iveta and other panelists in the first panel said. Nobody is expert. So who is the expert? Basically, if these people who are here are not experts on strategic corruption, then we have basically few people who can understand the topic. So I definitely, my biggest takeaway is that we need to become experts on strategic corruption, because it's something that it's a new concept, and it's giving us like interdisciplinary problems that we need to learn how to solve. And this is not problem of only of investigative journalists, NGOs or academics, but it's also a problem of our governments and state institutions, and we need to learn how to work together in a horizontal way and adapt to new realities, which we cannot do. As far from my perspective, we are really bad at doing this between ministerial cooperation. This is just something that I was working for ministry since 2014, and it's 2026, and we still cannot do it. So for us, this conference it's really important. We don't consider it as a one-time meeting with you. We consider it as some kind of starting point for us, that we would like to elaborate on this topic further, and we will be preparing more activities and projects in this field. So In the coming months, basically, we will, as a practical step, we will be finishing the framework in May, which I will make sure with my colleagues that you will get it in your emails or in print version if you would be interested. So in May we will be publishing this. And we are also really keen on building partnerships because I believe that this problem cannot be tackled only by Nest Institute or only by Transparency International, but it requires really like whole society approach, which makes it really hard to implement, but this is something that we need to do in order to make our societies more resilient. So we are looking forward to possibly to cooperate with you in our work, and we hope that we can move it forward. And if you want to join us or support us, please follow our social networks. We are really open to discussion, to cooperation, so we can contact us anytime, and we are open to new partnerships, new projects, and we'll be definitely developing this topic further. So thank you very much for all the guests being here in Bratislava. Thank you for all the guests as far as to Japan for joining us online, and also to Norway, and also the other countries. And I would like to thank on behalf of Nest Institute for being here, and also thank you for all the volunteers and all the technical support that we got for this conference to make it happen. So I hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.